Let's get started. The green light is on and the clock's ticking. And I appreciate you guys coming at 5 p.m. Not a great time slot, but thanks for coming here. My name's Connor Morrison. I'm going to be talking about Microsoft Forefront Online, protection for Exchange, which we quickly abbreviate to FOPI. You'll hear me mention FOPI all through the deck. I'm calling this a deep dive. We'll be going into some best practices and a bit more detail into the architecture. But given the size of the audience, I'd really encourage to make this a little bit interactive. And I'd also encourage you to move forward. Still okay if you leave early, but feel free to move forward and get a bit closer in. So I'm a senior program manager with FOPI. I've been with the team for just about 3 years now. I've seen it go through a lot of transitions. And I've worked on many areas within the service, the back end, the data center automation, core mail flow, a little bit of front-end UX work for our new connector feature, and sort of all over the place. So very happy to answer your questions as they come up and as I'm talking. So a few things to cover. Just an overview of the space, mail protection, what is FOPI, why should we bother? Talk about our SLAs and support. It's a big part of the service. I think when you move from on-premise to the cloud, it's a loss of control and feeling like you really own something. And I want to just give some data points on where we are with support and our SLAs, which are leading within the industry and financially backed. So talk a little bit about that. Then I'll cover and hopefully spend most of the time on FOPI's architecture, mostly around mail flow. There's a fair bit of overlap between this and the 333 session earlier today. So I'll go over some of the same stuff, but a little bit of a different spin on it. Just a show of hands, who was there in the 333 session? I recognize Dieter's. Oh, great. So no problem with overlap except for you. And then I'll talk, as I go through, I put that little star up there. I'll try and call out best practices and highlight some things that you guys can consider as you're configuring FOPI. Work that into the talk, and then at the end sort of summarize up and give some demo around some of the settings we recommend for you to set up within FOPI. Coming out of here, I'd like you guys to understand in more detail what happens to mail as it passes through FOPI. Just that little bit more depth and understanding of what's going on. That'll help you if you onboard and use the service. Understand best practices, of course. And a little bit on integrating Forefront protection for Exchange, FPE, and FOPI, the on-premises protection for Exchange, and how that can integrate with the cloud version. And we're lucky to have for Q&A a couple of folks from the FPE team sitting just at the front there. So importance of mail protection. Show of hands of who has some mail protection solution that they're using currently. Okay. Trick question. Yeah, of course, right? We don't have to tell you guys about this. Who's already using FOPI? Oh, fair number. Okay, great. Yeah, it's a pretty wild landscape out there, as you guys clearly know. 95% we measure of mail is spam. It's obnoxious, time-wasting. It wastes your people's time if they get sidetracked looking at mails they don't need to. It wastes your resources, your physical resources, network resource, compute resource. At worst, it's criminal, dangerous. It's the vector for virus. It's a vector for other kinds of malware, as well as phishing attacks and things like that. But of course, the flip side is that the 5% or so that's remaining, that's business critical. You've got to have that. So when we think of filtering and spam protection, it's not just about catching all spam. It's not catching the critical stuff when you shouldn't. So mail protection is clearly a must-have. Solution has to be reliable, has to be effective. And I'll talk a little bit about, for those of you not so familiar with FOPI, why FOPI, what we offer in this space. I'll go into an overview of the product and then dive a little deeper and talk about architecture. So the first thing is we have very comprehensive protection. What do I mean by that? We have a multi-layered approach both for antivirus and for anti-spam. Multiple engines make up our virus scanning. That allows us to catch more viruses. of course. Multi-layered from a spam perspective. That allows us to hit the mail with a variety of techniques to identify spam quicker and effectively. We fairly recently moved into the Leaders Quadrant for Gartner for secure email gateways. And part of that is around just how effective we are at blocking spam and virus. Additionally, enterprise-class reliability. You're going to move what you have owned, what's on-premise, what was yours, you're going to move that to the cloud and let someone else run it. Better work. We scale. As I mentioned, we have the SLAs. And we globally load balance. I'll talk more about that later, but this allows us to offer very high network uptime. We can ensure that no email is lost or bounced. We have some resilience built into the system to spool when we ultimately deliver to your servers on-premise. And that helps ride out issues in network and infrastructure on your side also. We fairly recently got ISO 27000 certified. And we have 24/7 phone support. The other thing, in addition to the something goes wrong and you need help, from an onboarding perspective, if you're a larger customer with 1,000 seats or more, we get an IPM, which is an implementation project manager from the support side that will help you with the onboarding process. They'll identify your needs, they'll understand your configuration, they'll understand what you've got and what migration looks like, and make your migration to FOPI smooth and using FOPI in the right way. And in terms of cost argument, FOPI really, and moving to the cloud in general, save time on your own network infrastructure, but we'll also save you time on spam management by being more effective at anti-spam and centralizing our expertise in anti-spam detection. We take you away from that daily reactive try and respond yourself to threats and be able to more concentrate on proactive, planned approaches to business policy and compliance and other aspects. We're subscription-based, dollar per user per month model. And so pay for what you need as you get it is the model there. So it's a good flexible way to try it out. We have a trial process also, and gradually ramp your users onto the service. One of the great highlights that we have in distinct from many of the other services is we financially back our SLAs. What I mean by that is, if you make a claim that we haven't met what we commit to, then we will give you service credit for that claim. Those claims are as follows: 100% known virus protection, 98% spam email detection, and less than 1 in 250,000 false positives. We'll go a little bit more into the details on that later. From an uptime perspective, we have the 5 nines in our SLA, so if we're not delivering no more than 5 minutes downtime a year or 5 nines as a percentage, then you can make a claim against that, and we will financially back that. Last but not least, on the SLA point, we guarantee a delivery in less than a minute for the 95th percentile of mail. Now, obviously, mail comes in lots of different sizes, so that 95th percentile smooths that out a little bit. And we'll be able to deliver that, do our processing, scan it for spam, apply the rules, etc., in less than a minute. I won't go through too much on customer testimonials, but if you want to read from the deck, there's some great studies out there of some of our customers who've adopted, and some of the savings and good raw data. It's not all just paint a rosy picture. This is real case studies. And you can get a sort of feel for experience for onboarding within FOPI. The one I will call out that I really like is, as we were talking about latency, Clifford Chance is one of the largest law firms in the world. They have around about 3,800 lawyers, or associates anyway. And of course, it's all about billable hours. And so a lawyer will sit on the phone with a client and say, let me send you the legal document, let me send you that PDF. And as soon as they send, the clock is ticking. And our SLA kicks in and we guarantee 60 seconds delivery. In practice, less than that. And so you can imagine how sensitive people like Clifford Chance are to latency within the system. So let me start by a little bit of audience participation. If anyone's got smartphones, laptops. You guys are all very attentive. Where's it? Is anyone doing email right now? Wow. Okay, there goes my demo. Mitch is doing email. I have some earlier mails I sent I can still use, but okay. All the Microsoft people are doing email. What does that say? Yes, please. So I'll take some mails to this address from Hotmail, from Gmail, from Yahoo, whatever your mail is, or just from your Microsoft account is fine. And later on, I'll come back to weave that into the demo as we look at using the FOPI Admin Center and some of those best practices. So a quick overview of, at a high level, the core capabilities of FOPI. Right at the start, the connection filtering. We analyze connections. We're all about IP lists and reputation and what do we trust, what do we not trust, and we use that as part of our spam filtering. Second up, connection management and routing. And this is largely a new area. There's a feature, FOPI connectors, that gives really an unprecedented level of control over routing within FOPI, as well as a wealth of options around transport level security, encrypting the mail over the wire at the connection level. And I'll talk about that later and show you where that a little bit fits into the system. Send the mail, okay. So we also have the load balance delivery and support multi-SMTP profiles so that we can behave well against your infrastructure, and you can get either round robin or some failover and redundancy in delivery. From an antivirus perspective, of course, we protect receiving and sending email-borne viruses. Receiving is obvious. Sending is another, if you're using FOPI for outbound mail, it's one of the ways you can find out that you've been overtaken by a botnet. And maybe it's an unintentional sending, not just really looking at people being malicious. Of course, we have multiple engine support, and we configure those with the latest settings for heuristics, etc. One of course, the key pieces you got to have anti-spam, and being within the cloud, we get that spam before it hits the corporate network. So if you're talking 95% of mail is spam, then just by pulling out the spam protection into a cloud service, your corporate network's got 20x less mail coming to it. We have NDR backscatter support, so we allow you to configure to prevent NDR backscatter, i.e. a non-delivery receipt which has been, a spammer has maliciously spoofed the sender address and is intended to come back as spam. And we have outbound spam detection and mitigation, and I'll show you a bit about that and talk about why you would use FOPI for outbound. From the policy perspective, we use policy as a sort of blanket term for really things around corporate compliance, implementing your business rules, building and customizing, not necessarily anti-spam, but really things around what's important to you, your organization, and how you handle particular types of mail based on its content, based on who's sending it, based on its size, based on attachments, things like that. So any questions on the core capabilities? Very quiet and no email. What a great audience. So just feel free to interrupt as I go along. It's totally fine. So just talk a little bit about what we have set up in terms of support, what in the service, how we back up all these capabilities, and then a little more about SLA. I've really covered that mostly already. Our support's organized into 4 tiers. Tier 1 is responding to calls, web requests. Tier 2 for escalations that require more privilege. Then Tier 3 is our operations team, the folks that actually run the service, maintain the service, and they'll also respond to troubleshooting of problems that potentially are production or infrastructure issues, or our requests from Tier 2 to do some data mining on behalf of a customer and get more insights into a customer issue. And Tier 4 is the dev test and, no, dev and PM. PM's in the room, and dev test and PM. The whole engineering team is part of that support structure. At Tier 4, we're bringing in the engineering team to manage the call, to manage the progress, to report back, to do the troubleshooting, to do all the steps required. for potential code issues or very serious and timely production issues. Our response is within 24 hours, typically sooner. And it's available for a toll-free phone call, or right on the website, just click Get Help, and you can file a ticket right there. Mentioned implementation project manager already. The other nice thing is we do have translation services, so if you're not a native English speaker, there is some support for getting someone to help you get through the call. SLAs in pictorial form. Just having talked about those, just to bring back then what we see in reality in production against these SLAs. I tried to get a nice data point for you guys that said, here are all the SLA claims and how many there were and all that sort of stuff. We have very, very few SLA claims. The last one, the person involved in SLA claims remembers, it was rejected, it was for a false positive. But we're at a point of maturity in the service now where we're really consistently hitting our SLA and not paying out, if you like. We see greater than 99% of spam caught in our calculations for spam detection, and 1 in 480,000 false positives. Our actual network performance is meeting consistently the 5 nines, so mail flow is not impacted on a day-to-day, minute-to-minute basis. The network keeps running. And we see typically for 95th percentile, we guarantee a minute. We see 5 to 15 seconds. It's really very fast to get through our pipeline. So let's talk a little bit more then about the architecture of FOPI and how that, together, the machines work to deliver the service, to give those SLAs and the spam filtering and virus and policy capabilities. So the first and very significant point is this is truly a shared architecture. There's no pods, there's no this customer gets this machine and shares it with a couple of other customers, and when they grow too big, we move them apart. There's none of this segmentation clusters, nothing like that. Every machine worldwide across all of our data centers has a copy of, a stripped down, albeit, copy of the customer settings, replicated worldwide. And because of that, any machine in any data center can handle any mail for any FOPI customer at any time. So that gives us a tremendous amount of freedom as we manage the service. That gives you a tremendous amount of availability of network infrastructure. One way to think of it is, if you're a victim of a spam attack, you have all of our machines at your disposal. From our perspective, and delivering on that 5 nines, when we need to do things in production in the back end, when we need to maintain the service, when we need to apply updates and patches and the various things that go on, we have a lot of flexibility in traffic management so that we can keep everything running, mail just keeps flowing, and take up to a whole data center, even more out of production, out of rotation, as we call it. That can go offline for a disaster reason. That could be planned offline. The mail keeps flowing, the network uptime stays there, the SLAs are guaranteed. We're capacitized, we're in some sense over-capacitized. We can take our largest data center offline and handle our historical peak of mail volume with room to spare. So I wanted to, there's many things we do to deliver on that. I wanted to touch on a couple of things. As you walk around, and if you've been down to the exhibit hall, you'll see a lot of System Center, and it's a big flagship product really for Microsoft, and that's front and center in us running an effective service. We use it throughout. We monitor all of our activities. We have a custom heat map, as we call it, that shows up to the minute status at a glance across all the machines. The alerting and the tooling that we've built around that allows us to resolve issues ahead of customer impact. So we get the alert, the SCOM generates it, we look for patterns, and we can apply automated or semi-automated or standard operating procedures to address those problems and keep the service running smoothly without undue impact. Second thing I wanted to highlight, and the little picture below shows a little bit of that, is we have an application load balancing scheme as well. For some reason, you put 2,000, 3,000 mail servers together and get them to do something, and it's the same SKU and the same wires and the same power and the same everything. And some of them just get a little stuck and don't run so well, and things just don't always keep going smoothly. So we have an application-level load balancing capability we call pushback. Not to be confused with exchange back pressure, although it has some relation to that. Pushback is all about our servers being able to request that they be taken offline for the purposes of load balancing. So we monitor performance counters on the machine. We look at all of our health indicators, and as we hit certain thresholds, those machines will go back to a central brain, if you like, that looks at the whole system, and they'll say, hey, I'm real busy and I don't want to do any more work right now. The central brain is the piece of that system that then makes sure when multiple machines are saying that, it doesn't just let everybody take a break. So we manage the load across the service and redistribute based on what the machines are feeding back, or keep them running hot if the load globally is high. And this load management is a way that we at the network edge, at least, avoid the machine going into back pressure. We ourselves are probably one of the world's biggest exchange edge deployments, and so we run this pushback system then so that anyone connecting into the service doesn't hit a machine that's now gone into exchange back pressure, so we're not rejecting any connections. Okay, a lot of animation. And of course, as well as going out, when conditions get better, the machine is recovered. If the health indicators are good, it looks to be in a good state, or if the maintenance has been done and it's been recovered, then it comes back into rotation and takes on its fair share of the load. So let's talk, having gone from the sort of global scale and how the central system manages pushback and how we're geo-distributed, let's go right down into the mail host itself and what's happening in that pipeline that runs on the mail host as it processes your mail. And apologies to Dieter, who's heard all this before. So first thing, I'll start from the left and kind of work right. And I'll talk about, there's no animations in this one, it's I'll just talk you through the mail that flows through the system. The far left, little almost off the screen actually, indicating the sync, and that's tied to the directory services. So FOPI has a downloadable client tool you run within your Active Directory, could be on your AD box, that synchronizes your mail users, if you like, mail-enabled objects into the service, and allows us to know what a valid recipient looks like. If we know all the email addresses, then right at the edge, we can protect against mails that are to your organization but are not to a valid user, and we can drop them at the connection level. The other connection level protection we're doing is IP-based edge blocks. This is a huge part of us protecting, identifying spam and blocking it before even we really accept the full message. We have, I think it's around about 100 million IP addresses. We have third-party block lists that we use. And whenever a connection comes into us, we'll compare the connecting IP to our block list and see if the reputation of that sender is good. If it's not good, we'll drop that straight away with an SMTP 55X rejection. The other thing we see a lot of at the edge, and we even found some bugs in Exchange for this, is we'll see a lot of malformed email. There's a couple of reasons for this. There are just badly written MTAs out there. There are people not adhering to standards. And there are people maliciously trying to send badly formatted, badly constructed mail envelopes to trip up other MTAs and get spam through. So we have a pretty powerful envelope block system in there as well that's looking for good formatting, but it's not purely a standards-based check. We sort of have to go at the gray area where legitimate mail sometimes doesn't conform to the standard. Where we find it looks real bad, we can reject it right at the edge with our envelope block. The final piece at the bottom there is this is also where we implement the FOPI connector settings. And I'll talk more about that a little bit later, but essentially this is where we can negotiate transport level security, check certificates, and make sure that we can establish the connection based on the settings that have been configured by the user. So if it gets past this stage, We know it came from a good IP. We know it's at least reasonably well formed. We know it's to a valid recipient, and we're talking on the connection at the right security level. We accept the mail at that point, and we'll have a copy of that, so we have resilience there, and if anything bad happens, we can recover that mail and keep processing. And we'll move to virus scanning. Virus scanning is where we do our multi-engine. Right now, it's Kaspersky, Symantec, and Authentium. And we chop and change that, and we monitor that, and we keep that current to deliver on our 100% known virus SLA. We change both the ordering for effectiveness, we update our engines, and we change the settings as well, taking advantage of the latest configuration changes in the virus engines, implementing heuristics where appropriate, and things like that. If we find a virus, we delete the mail. From the customer's perspective, the mail was rejected. And we move on to the policy enforcement. So at the point of policy enforcement, we know we have a good mail from a good sender, from a good IP to a valid recipient without a virus. And we can go through and start running the business logic, if you like, the checks that you guys can put in that make sure that the mail message adheres to whatever corporate standards you want. We can, just some examples of that, check for attachments of certain types, check for sizes, check for content, look for patterns, look for keywords, and take actions like allowing the mail in, of course, is one, override and just allow it regardless. We can reject the mail, we can decorate the mail, various things we can do as the mail comes in based on what the policy rules have flagged, if you like. And I'll show you that in the demo and show you a little bit of the UI around policy. If the policy hits and the action to take is quarantine, then the policy, the mail itself will be shelved, if you like, in our quarantine. And we can have end user access to that, or more typically, the admin has access to that and can, on behalf of the user, release the message. So it's a good way to stage sort of questionable mail for further review and implement a sort of business workflow around approval or things like that. If we get past the content policy quarantine, we move into spam protection. And one of the reasons this is last is for a cost reason. This is where we really do the deepest checks on the mail. We'll go through the safe senders list. If you notice the little best practice rosette on the left, if you sync up your users for the valid recipients check, you also sync in the safe sender information. And so when we come to do the spam checks, we can go through that list, and if the safe sender is there, let the mail through. We can then apply our rules to this message. Now, our rules are essentially human-engineered pattern matching. It's assisted by a variety of tools, but essentially we have a team of spam analysts that sits and lives and breathes spam and spam patterns and regular expressions primarily, day in, day out, and handcraft regular expression pattern matching to address the spam threats of the day, if you like. Over time, we've built up over 400,000 rules, and at any given time, there's 10 to 20,000 of those, what we call in rotation, in use, and scoring messages. It's not an absolute exact science, so we look for multiple aspects of the mail to identify it as spam. We also have a fingerprint engine. What I mean by fingerprint is, rather than take a static pattern and apply it to a mail, we take the mails themselves and look for similarities across mail that appears to be spam, and then try and use that as a fingerprint for other similar-looking mail. Spammers aren't dumb and send the same mail all the time. They will tweak the mail and vary it, and we try and clear that out and get a good fingerprint that we can use to identify mail from previous mail. Finally, I haven't quite gone in order, but we also have what we call additional spam filters, and these are user-selected spam options, if you like, where you can sort of up the level of spam checking. And some of those we recommend as a best practice, and I'll get into that. If the score is high enough, we'll send by default the spam to spam quarantine. There are other options for what you do with spam, such as tag it with a header or deliver it into the junk mail folder. We recommend spam quarantine as a best practice. As this gets, if you remember the earlier discussion about wasting time and being in people's face and getting in the way, this gets the spam into a different place. The user is notified of what's in their spam periodically in their spam quarantine, and you can give user access and they can choose to release from spam quarantine or they can choose to ignore it. And if we've been effective at identifying the spam, mostly you'll get the report that tells you what's in the quarantine and you don't even need to go there. So finally, if we get past all these deep content-based pattern matching, fingerprint checking, all the settings for spam, if it gets through all of that, then we know we've got a good mail and it goes into delivery. Delivery is spooled, so if your corporate network is having problems, down, unresponsive, then we'll retry for 5 days. And when you come back online, we'll be kind to your servers and we'll trickle the mail in at the right rate so we don't bring you down. Final piece of that picture and the little faceless heads at the bottom, not very flattering for our spam analysts, but this is not a left to right straight line, this is a loop. And as we get the false positive, false negative feedback, our analysts use that data to feed back into the system and improve both the matching of their rules and the IP lists that we maintain. If we see enough rule hits for a particular IP and no good mail from that IP, that can go on to our own internally maintained reputation list. So I marked customer feedback, the false positive, false negative, as a best practice, something we encourage. It's something the team very actively monitors. They come into a pool, there's tooling around processing that pool and identifying patterns and very quickly generating rules and reacting to that. False positive, just to clarify in case you're not familiar with the terms we're using, false positive we say when we think something's spam and it's not. From an experience point of view, you would click the not junk button. And false negative when we missed a spam. And we'll get all sorts of reports back, including, someone sends a picture of their new kitten and someone says this is spam, and we have to filter out the sort of human element as well. But this is really how we build up a picture of the threat landscape, if you like, what spam is like, and improve our system. Is there any questions?
During the sync, we have a lot of Active Directory email-enabled service accounts.
Yeah.
Is there a method to exclude those?
So the question was, during the sync, we have a large number of service accounts. They're not real users, but they're there in Active Directory. Is there a way to filter that? I think the filtering, we have the owner of Sync here. To my knowledge, the filtering is pretty limited on Sync. Those will come in as well as if they were users. We sync in all mail-enabled objects.
And also, can the users set up their own individual sync?
Yes, if you add a safe sender in Outlook and you are configured to Outlook, for example, and you are configured with the sync, then that will come in through the sync path into FOPI. Oh, can you just add outside of that Outlook loop?
Well, myself, as a single user, if I say, I always
I see.
get mail
Yep.
from this guy, can I add it instead of the administrator?
Okay, so question is for an individual user, do you have your own set of safe senders? Yes, that's how it works, yeah. Any other questions? Okay, so I'll show a very similar picture for outbound. There's obviously no edge in that sense. We do apply outbound connectors. That's not shown here, and I'll talk a little bit about that later. But on outbound, one of the things that I really want to highlight is on the right-hand side in pink and blue. The FOPI acts as your proxy for delivery to the internet. So what do you get from that? Well, if you send your outbound mail through FOPI, you get virus scanning, so you won't be a source of virus propagation. You get policy enforcement, very important. You can prevent leaks of corporate information. You can set standards of who your people talk to. You can really do all of the power that's within policy. And you get the outbound spam protection. Now, since you're the sender, we don't want to just delete and reject that mail back to you. We'll still try and deliver that spam. But based on the scoring of that spam, we'll send it down 2 different paths. For good mail, which right now is a score of less than 30, we'll send it through our outbound pool and out to the internet. That gives you great, reliable delivery, of course. But it also protects us against ourselves as a service getting onto a block list, or before that, getting throttled by one of the large ISPs. For the same reason, if the mail looks suspicious, then we'll send it through what we call a high-risk delivery pool. We think there's something up with this mail, but we're not going to block it, delete it from you sending it. We send it through a separate pool of machines out to the internet. We get two things from that. We get, one, if we do get throttled, meaning if an ISP starts to prevent our ability to send in the volume that we're used to, or we get blocked, worse, then we only affect this questionable mail. So that's a good thing from an isolation point of view. Secondly, we now have the place where we can watch in more detail, the same spam analysts can watch what is happening in the high-risk delivery pool. We call that our SEWR report, Spam Early Warning Report. And that's what they can consult to see, based on the patterns of mail and the scores and what's happening with the main ISPs out there, whether or not we need to alert a customer that they've become a source of spam. So one of the great things about Outbound is you can use that as a way to get feedback on what's happening that you may not even yet have been aware of. You could have a botnet just silently sitting there and kicking out spam. And if that hits the right thresholds, we'll detect that. And before we get blocked, before we get on that block list, as part of this early warning, we'll start working with the customer directly to mitigate that. The little rosette on the side on SPF, we do recommend that you put against your domain and in the SPF record our IP addresses. We have a DNS entry for that, so you add that to the SPF record, and that helps us send on your behalf for ultimate delivery. Any questions on Outbound? Dieter.
Are there any unchangeable limits on outbound traffic? For example, you said every 2 weeks about 20,000 emails as a newsletter, personalized newsletter. Will that cause any issues?
So the question was, what are the limits on sending outbound? And we send 20,000? 20,000 every 2 weeks. The recommendation for outbound is that you maximize, I think it's, I might need to look at my notes, 50 concurrent connections with 50 messages, I think it's a minute. 30? 30 per minute. So don't send it in a tight loop all at once. So if you manage, just like sending out mail outside of FOPI, you have to manage your flow of mail to be a little bit batched and a little bit constrained from these big and concentrated bursts. And we have best practices around 50 concurrent and 30 per minute around that. And then it should just flow just fine. And we'll detect if there's a problem before it gets too serious also. So, another question.
Is there a possibility to send out to partner organizations based on TLS?
Is there a possibility to send out?
So I've got two banks that are
Yeah.
communicating with each other. They want all their mail to flow through FOPI, but they want to have communication encrypted. So
Yeah. So for over-the-wire encryption, TLS, we have the FOPI connector feature is custom designed to, one of the things is to give you options around TLS. You can have opportunistic TLS between the two parties, or you can force TLS such that the mail won't send unless you meet the TLS requirements. Within the TLS negotiation, we also give the certificate options, so you can have a domain certificate check, you can check, you can have a self-signed certificate. So we've got a lot of flexibility around TLS for exactly those secure partner scenarios. Oh. Sorry, one more question? Yes, sorry. Paying attention, great. Yeah, so we talk about encryption and over-the-wire, TLS. This one with the star is separate. This is our actually a third-party solution that we sell as exchange-hosted encryption and is based on voltage technology in the background. And that's the policy action of encrypt. That will encrypt the mail before sending it, and then the recipient of that will get a notification that an encrypted mail is waiting for them on these secure servers. And there's a process for, they call it zero download, where you can click the link and get credentials and authenticate to get that mail and decrypt it. So yes, that's a very, very important feature.
Follow up on that, how do we identify whether it has encrypted process? Keyword on the second?
Yeah, so the question was, how do we identify that? Essentially, you have all the options within the FOPI policy framework for how you flag that mail. So what that means is you can match keywords, you can match subject, you can match body, you can match mail fields, sender, recipient, IP, domain, the full spectrum of what policy will offer you. I can show you more on policy from the demo itself. And then the action that you take based on the match is encrypt, and that'll kick it off. Oh, and Harpreet has that in his demo on Thursday also. That's the interactive session. Yeah, great. Another question back there? Does the no, it doesn't. No, we have, and way back. The service has been around for 8 or 9 years now. It's 10 years now. Oh my goodness! So it was originally an acquisition of a company called FrontBridge, which was a Linux-based mail protection in the cloud, and we've been porting that to Windows, and it's been around for 10 years total and about 5 years within Microsoft. So its history, if you like, is not tied entirely to the Microsoft stack. So the sender doesn't have to be Exchange for the inbound case. The recipient doesn't have to be Exchange. And Outlook, there are some good integration scenarios where we can sort of do better together, but there's no strict requirements on the MTA or sender or recipient. Good question. SMTP, yeah. Happily, there's a protocol. Yeah. Great. Oh, one more, yes.
One more. You have a certain use case where messages from certain mailboxes are automatically quarantined until somebody can review it and release it.
Yeah.
Is that a FOPI feature, or do we have to mutate that?
So the question was, we have a use case where you want to quarantine and then allow someone to review and then release it. So FOPI's quarantine is for inbound mail. Don't have an outbound quarantine at this time. The quarantine feature allows user access or admin access. It allows control over whether or not attachments can be downloaded, and it allows the release on behalf, both for the policy quarantine and the spam quarantine. It's an action on policy also, yes. Same as encrypt, but just not on the outbound case. Oh, one more. Yeah. Can he's so far away. You can I can't hear. Sorry. Yeah, it's configurable. The minimum we support is 3 days, and you basically get a digest. If we just notified you for every spam, it would a little defeat the purpose. So we have a sort of a digest that we call a spam notification, and you get a mail with a set of links in it that says we saw this, and it can be 3 days or more.
When do they get that? Every day, or do you do that?
It's configurable, and the minimum frequency is every 3 days. I haven't tried a maximum, but oh, 14 is the maximum? Oh, okay.
We hold it for 14 days. If no action is taken, we drop it. 14.
Yes, yeah.
So will that change? Because I've got quite some customers that are complaining about it, telling, well, we want daily reports on what spam we are missing, because, there can be important mails that need direct action.
Yeah.
So it needs daily action.
Yeah.
For customers who have DBEV enabled, specific filtering enabled, we give daily option.
Oh, we do?
That's a special case. For those customers who have directly size blocking.
I did not know that. So the question was around frequency, and I think wanting it daily. Seems if you have directory-based edge blocking, the sync happening and the recipient filtering / edge blocking, that will allow you to crank that down to 1 day. I was not aware of that feature. Cool. Yeah. Yeah, yeah. It places a higher requirement on the accuracy of your filtering, right? If you're never holding a valuable mail, then who cares? But yeah, if daily seems reasonable, yeah.
But in that scenario, doesn't the user always have access to that mailbox? They can always go out there and look?
Indeed, yeah. If you enable end user access to quarantine, which we would recommend, then yes, the user can go out to the mailbox. Yeah, yeah. Yes, please.
I would also request, if a particular user's mail is always going into quarantine, there is something wrong with that IP address or the message they're sending, which is treated as spam and it's going to quarantine. We should probably give feedback saying that, hey, this is not spam, so that we can take that out of the equation and say,
Yeah, yeah.
So if you give feedback to us through feedback loop, there is false positive at abuse.mail.mixer.com or false negative at. So if you tell us, we will know. And we will use that data for the next time.
Yeah.
Or you can go ahead and specify the method to automatically forego the IP reputation stuff with known partners that should receive.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's a great 2 points. One was just in case the mics didn't catch it. The point Sri was making is that in the situations where you are finding mail in quarantine, let's get the false positive information back to us, and that helps us act on that. And if it's something that's recurring, as Frank pointed out, let's one option is if this is really a trusted business partner, you essentially trust their outbound reputation, then you can set up one of these FOPI connectors such that if the mail comes from their domain and from their IPs, then you will let that bypass filtering. So a couple of options there. Good question. Anything else? Shall we move on? We have one more.
One box that I'm not seeing here, maybe it's in another slide, is all this information on what's being quarantined. Do we have an administrator view into that so we can do lookups?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And there's also I have a slide that looks a little bit similar I didn't bring into the deck, which is our reporting and trace pipeline. So as this mail goes through all these phases, at each stage we're pulling off essentially the log data right down at the individual log lines from the code. We're parsing that and we're pulling that up to a centralized database and aggregating every little thing that happened to the mail as it moved through our pipeline. So from a traceability perspective, the administrator gets the ability to go to the console, and I'll show you guys this, go to the console and say, what happened to that mail? Where is it now? Where did it end up? And we call that message trace and near real-time message trace. We have a 60-minute guarantee from the point the mail has been traced, if you like, to it appearing in the database. And there's, as you can imagine, there's a huge volume of data that we're crunching into these trace entries. Similarly, we do a report on traffic counts, and we take the measures of how much is coming in and then what's happening to it. Is it being spam filtered, virus filtered, policy filtered? And we'll build up reports based on that. So yeah, this is really just focusing on the action on the mail. Yes. Okay. So, led in a lot of. So let me flip over to. Oops. Okay, great. So I'll show you the administration console, your window, if you like, into that pipeline and other aspects of the service and how you can configure. Hopefully, yep, great. So So I'm going in as the admin. I'll sign in. You can see I've not set a strong password policy, but I'll show you how to do that. And I'll flip this report over and show you, we mentioned earlier in the slides that we see 95% spam. Well, this is our network-wide report that's on the landing page of our administration console. And it shows you how we are seeing across all of the mail we handle, how we're seeing the breakdown. And this one is sitting at 95.97%. If you scroll down, we get the counts of what's delivered. Our amount of mail is increasing. Every minute. And what's also interesting is the trend for spam right now is down. We're getting better and better at catching spam. Sort of the war is never over, if you like, because there's people out there highly motivated to get better at sending spam and getting it through, but historically we're showing a downward trend. So from there, if I go back to the 30-day report, the last month, it's actually nearer 80-something%. It takes a little bit of time to crunch through the data here. So we're at 89.6% spam is what we see now in production. And you can see things like the business trend at least is quiet weekends from a mail flow perspective. And with some of the more detailed reports, we can also see the longer-term trends in spam, such as back-to-school season, Thanksgiving, Christmas, the holidays, that kind of thing. So let me go over to the company page. And so this is my little Lucky PM company, my own domain. And I've set up, I told you about the multi-SMTP profiles. This is where you would configure that, and then you can use that in all the domains for your organization. In terms of password policy, one of our best practices is to recommend that you enforce a password policy other than the bare minimum that's there in FOPI. So increasing the length for the minimum maybe to 8, including some symbols, having uppercase, lowercase, all the things you're used to, you can configure FOPI to mandate that for all the logins. There's an interesting one of allow username as password, which I was quite surprised to see, but wouldn't necessarily recommend that one. If you are using that one, if you could tell me your username, that would be, that'd be great. I'm going to let Harpreet answer that because there's a lot around single sign-on and the integration with O365 story. So there's two parts to the answer. One is, the question is around federated sign-on, ADFS, and the answer right now is we don't have that. If you're using Office 365 and you have the Business Live ID for sign-in, then we'll support a single sign-on via that path. And we're looking at in the future the federation options and integrating with this Live ID. Another question. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. That's a good question. The administrator can set up certainly on the user's behalf. I believe they can. Let me go to that. That's funny. I've never done that before. Yeah. Require on first log on kind of thing. Password. Okay, so we've got Bob at Lucky PM. I think it will allow blank and then... Oh, that's right. Yeah, sorry. I should know this. Okay, so you click on the need password link, and it'll send it in mail. It'll send the password, a link to reset the password with a one-time login, the usual kind of thing. It's funny, I didn't know that. Before we did single sign-on, this was in our beta release. This was our workaround before the single sign-on stuff was working, where even the O365 folks coming in would click on the need password, even though they were signed in, and get a FOPI password just for that time. We cleaned all that up. I'd completely forgotten about this. Okay, good. So let me log back in as the admin. And if I move from the company view to the domains view, and in this case I just have this one domain, you see I'm using that multi-SMTP profile. If I scroll down and just over on the right, you see my quarantine options. I've set it up as how we would typically recommend that this be configured. The spam quarantine kind of belongs to the user in that sense, so allowing user access and allowing Outlook add-in to be downloaded for this junk mail reporting, allow the users to download that themselves and help with the false positive reporting. For policy quarantine, typically not allowing user access. It's more of an administration function. And allowing the administrator to both release messages to the user, that's your review and approval workflow, as well as download attachments. You can also specify if you want when a user submits a false positive that someone in the organization can get a copy of that. A little further down, the directory sync option. So this just shows that I have elected to synchronize with this installable tool, directory synchronization tool. If you search for FOPI directory synchronization tool, you'll find it in the download center. And that I'm setting up to block where I detect mail that's not on the list of the users that this tool has generated. And then again, you can get a notification when that is done. So if there's a problem uploading the users, the service that's not running right, then the administrator can get notified. So the second thing, just a little further down, I'll skip over archive since we're not talking about that, is the spam action. This defaults in FOPI to spam quarantine, and that's what we'd recommend for getting the spam out of the face of the user in FOPI. You can also send it all to another address. Tag the subject spam : or you choose, or you can add an X header, and that's a good way if you want to do processing on the on-premise side. Stick something in an X header and then have a transport rule or something set up to act on that. So we recommend spam quarantine. And then these additional spam filters, as we remember at the end of the pipeline as we do the deep spam checks, we also do these additional checks on the mail. There's a couple we would recommend to consider putting on. And these the suite of them will either increase the score, in which case make it more likely to be flagged as spam, but not guaranteed. Or they'll actually mark as spam. So typically, an empty message is not a valid or useful message, so you mark that as spam. And then for images with links to remote sites, numeric IPs and URLs, we recommend that you can put that on to increase the score. So if you think about it, if there's sort of corroborating evidence to seeing these links or these numeric URLs, then that'll help make sure we flag it. And finally on the list, you can read through the other ones, but finally on the list is NDR backscatter. You can elect to effectively turn off NDRs and reduce the risk of a spammer using an NDR as a way to get their spam through. For kicks, you can click through onto the sensitive word list and read the words, but I won't do that here. The one thing I didn't mention is the test mode there is just a way really to try out those settings and get a feel for how they are in the network, and you can, again, modify the subject or put an X header based on the test. So moving across to policy, we talked a little bit about the engine and some of the things that you can do with policy, and I created just a handful of rules around what we'd recommend as a sort of minimum set and to think about when you configure policy for your organization. So I have on outbound, reject if I see a social security number, stop PII leaking out of the company. If I have company secrets, misread that. So on the PII one, there's that encryption action. If you've bought the FOPI encryption service, then you get the policy action of encrypt. Tie that to your policy rule. Get your match condition, in this case, social security number, and you guaranteed that that's encrypted on the way out and that the recipient can then decrypt it. The first rule I have here, stop company secrets leaking out, was just to give an example of using a dictionary of keywords within a policy rule. So if I scroll down here, there's a dictionary keywords.txt, and I can open that over here. And you could fill that with, could be sort of project code names or patterns that you want to look for in your outbound mail that might suggest somebody is sending something that is leaking secrets. We can also set that up to do regular expression matching and really a lot of options around how you match on the content to flag the policy rule and then take the appropriate action.
What if you want to do it on characters?
On Unicode.
Global companies or different languages.
If you want to do on. So the question is, if you want to match policy against Unicode characters, I've not verified if that works. I'll need to get back on that. I don't know the answer to that. That's it. Does anyone? Do you know if Unicode is? Okay. So an example, kind of silly example, I guess, but you can set the action quarantine, base it on a domain, base it on an email address, any of the fields, and then those mails will end up in quarantine. So let me hop over to quarantine and show you guys what that looks like. So as the administrator, I have both, of course, my own account and my view of the quarantine, but I can also go ahead and open another user's both junk mail quarantine and the policy quarantine. So let me go and open that one. So there's the mail from this Gmail account that got quarantined. I have the option select it, move it to the user's inbox. You review the mail. Maybe you're checking the content, checking that it's okay for the user to have got this. On the junk email side, then this is where, from a quarantine perspective, before it's got to the client, this is where the user can effectively say this is a false positive. So I select the mail. A spam analyst somewhere is not going to like me for this, but it's gone. I don't know why it's not refreshing. Okay, good. So, oops. You can go back from the, I didn't do it there. You can go back from the quarantine into the admin center with the link at the top. I just missed that. So let's take a look at reporting. So There's multiple different reports available. I created 2 basic traffic reports. I'll just quickly show you what is in the reports. So it gives you a very, very detailed breakdown. This is a pretty inactive domain, but of both the counts of all the traffic and what action was taken on those from an inbound perspective and in the other report from an outbound perspective. In the quarantine case, I get a drill down. We've saved all of the message details, so if I see something flagged as quarantine, I can get to the actual header information or some of the header information for that mail. Let me close that one down. In terms of the different types, I have both the traffic with inbound and outbound down there. I can report on viruses, the deferral report. So if mail is having trouble getting through to my organization, I can build a report, see that, track that. And also my top users. So who's using the most, who's sending the most mail, receiving the most mail, also can be reported on. For all of the reporting, I can click down here and enable for scheduled delivery, so that rather than have to keep going back to the website and keep looking at these graphs, I can get a quick look at my reports directly in my email. All the reports are also savable as Excel files, so you can do your own, take the data and do your own pivoting. So finally, on the UI, in terms of troubleshooting, there'll always be the time where someone expects a mail to have got through, they're not sure what happened to it, they call up the support guy, the IT guy, and say, hey, where's my mail? And so our message trace gives you the ability to get to the details of what happened to that mail. If you remember the pipeline as it passed through at each stage, we're ticking off its progress and we're building up this detailed trace of where it's at. So let me see if I can find that one mail that came through. And there's the one that Sridhar sent. Oh, Mitch sent one as well. Okay, so great. And some of my earlier testing. And get down to, that's cool, get down to the real details. In this case, I don't actually have my Exchange server running that this domain is supposed to deliver to. So I can see that this mail is sitting in deferral, and it's trying to connect and timing out. If I still can't get past here and can't self-serve, then that message ID is something I can also use if I call up the FOPI customer support and very quickly give them, this is the message I'm interested in and I'm not finding. Another question?
I didn't see a subject line or subject field in there. Message ID is great for tracing, but trying to identify a particular mail.
Yeah, we don't trace the subject line. There was a couple of reasons for that decision. It's a very frequently asked for feature. The reasons we haven't done it so far, number one is a privacy concern. Subject lines are considered same as body in the sense that they can contain highly confidential and private material. And so if we are storing it off in our trace files, we really need to be a lot more careful with that data. And we may have customers that don't want that. We need to give the option not to put it in. So we would take on a bit of work to do that. Second aspect was around scale. There are literally terabytes of data a day coming out of our trace. And adding in subject to that certainly beefs up the total. It is a known feature, though, that we're not saying no to permanently, but right now it's not in the system. Yes, yes. And that's your box in your data warehouse or whatever, and so just with it all being centralized, it's not that it can't be done. It's just we haven't done that yet. PII, yeah. Privacy concern is a big one. What you also get is just seeing the timestamps, the from, the to, and that can sort of help zero in on it. But yeah, subject is kind of the thing that everyone remembers. Currently, we don't have that. We have made, what's that? Good point. You can, from the trace, you can't do that kind of wildcard. You have to at least have the domain on one side resolved, and then a fully resolved recipient or sender on the other side. You can build a report to get a picture across a domain, but the individual traces at this point you can't do. We are making investments in our trace infrastructure to deliver that, but right now you can't do that. We have about 4 minutes. I should probably get back to the deck. So let me zip forward to, oops, that's backwards. And I have the screens for what I've done. These are describing the things we went through. So I'll just zip past these. File extension is another best practice. We recommend things like exe, VBS, PIF, SCR as some very good candidates to by default put in your policy rules, and just block that. Message trace. Great. Last and squeezed a little bit for time, but did want to get the point out around if you have Exchange, you have FPE on-premise, and you're thinking of a move to FOPI. We do have some integration points, and we do have some overlap in what the two technologies are doing that really makes it worth having the two working together. The message anti-malware, the antivirus that FPE has even more engines, so you get a little more with that. And of course, for your internal mail flow, where you're sending within your own mail server and it's not going up to FOPI and coming back, then you get the FPE will do the virus scan on that, not to mention scheduled scans and things like that. From an anti-spam, there are more options around content filtering in FPE. But probably the biggest thing I wanted to talk about in how FPE and FOPI will work together is the ability to sync FPE and FOPI. So you can take your safe list and block list, your IPs that you've put into your FPE, and sync them up to the service so that it benefits from what you've personally set up for your configuration. Going the other way, FPE gets to benefit from the service. So DNSPL is just the name we use for our block list that we internally build as we see spam patterns out in the wild. And we'll funnel that down to FPE so that the on-prem product is kept fresh with the learnings of the service, if you like, so you can kind of take advantage of that. You have the option to quarantine in service or on-premise, and there's more options with FPSMC. I believe we have a session that has already passed. What was the code for that? SIM 333. Connectors we talked about, and in the interactive session, Harpreet will go into a lot more detail, and you can drive the discussion and have a lot more Q&A around that. So in terms of takeaways, hope you have seen that the FOPI service provides leading protection against mail threats, backed by industry-leading support and SLA, financially backed on SLA. Our architecture is tried and tested over multiple years, continuously evolving certainly, but built to scale and maintain high reliability. Some of the best practice, I hope, give you a flavor for getting set up and doing more than just the out-of-the-box defaults to get the best experience. And with FPE, you get defense in depth and the ability to keep on-prem and online in sync. Questions? Thank you, everybody, for great questions throughout. That was really certainly great for me, and I think helped drive the discussion well. Thank you. And any more questions, since we're out of time, come forward. I'm here, and I'd be happy to take them. Can we take the question offline, or you want to? A quick plug for some related sessions. 331, Better Together. You can watch the recording. It happened today. Harpreet delivered that. And 333 for the centralized management. Some track resources, and this one, And please help us help you in that sense. Fill out the evaluation form. You can win a prize, and that's our feedback loop for these events, and try and make them relevant and valuable for you guys. So with that, thank you very much. And I'm here to answer any more questions, and we have others that can help too.